Hi, you're watching part 6 of an 8-part series about the Igavania or Metroidvania genre Castlevania games. This one is about Portrait of Ruin. Castlevania Portrait of Ruin released in 2006 for Nintendo DS. At the time, this was the 5th game in this Castlevania genre sub-series released in the past 6 years. No matter what new features Portrait boasted, it shouldn't have been able to combat franchise fatigue. It somehow did. Portrait reviewed and sold almost as well as Dawn of Sorrow. In many ways, the new interesting stuff in Portrait is all a result of rearranging and expanding on game mechanics and systems present in Dawn. The biggest things Portrait brought to show and tell are having 2 characters present for the whole game, 1 character switch button away, who both have different strengths, and the levels in the game reaching further away from Dracula's castle. The character switching is mostly new, but the foundation of the system was set with Dawn's Julius mode and the 3 characters present there. Jonathan and Charlotte specialize mostly in physical and magical attacks respectively, but unfortunately, this game is not Ikaruga. Seemingly little care was put into the balance of attack elemental weaknesses, meaning Jonathan is the real main character and Charlotte is mostly a support character, unless you want to try a difficult Charlotte-only challenge run. The game world expanding beyond Dracula's castle is definitely new, but it too stems from Dawn of Sorrow with its Abyss area, which was so large that the developers saw fit to give it its own separate castle map. Aria also has a similar endgame area called the Chaotic Realm, but that one thematically does not count for map completion, and the whole area displays a blank map if you check it. Portrait having many areas separated from the castle is a pretty cool way to expand on physical space in the game world and to vary the types of environments that the game takes place in. In a 2006 interview translated by Shmuplations, Iga stated that he was getting antsy to get outdoors, and this is why Portrait has so many more outdoor areas. There are 2 downsides to this game having so much game world to traverse. The first is that it removes the cohesiveness of exploring one large, interconnected map, and the second is that the level design is uninspired. More than any other game in the series, except maybe the PlayStation 2 games, Portrait's rooms are mostly square, with wide open spaces for the fighting of enemies to take place. Even areas that look cool in terms of their design almost all have the same shape to them. There is one upside to this downside though. Portrait of Ruin is one of the best action platformer games on the DS. Portrait's combat is very fun, and the player who seeks more depth in Castlevania combat will be happy to find it here. Fighting game motion inputs return for Jonathan, the main character, and 3 out of 5 of the bonus characters too. Richter mode Richter even has some brand new motion input moves that he didn't have in Symphony of the Night's bonus Richter mode. It was only on this, my 4th playthrough of Portrait, that I realized that the heaviest weapon attacks can be cancelled out of using the flying knee fighting game input move. Finding stuff like this is really rewarding and fun, but unfortunately in the case of Portrait, players may easily miss out on it by only sticking with the basics. In the main game, another mechanic from Dawn was rearranged. Jonathan's subweapons are not souls like in the Sorrow games, but some do drop from enemies, and others can be obtained from the shop or as quest rewards. Instead of subweapons leveling up with multiples of the same soul like in Dawn, Jonathan's subweapons themselves have experience points. Each subweapon starts out quite weak, but if you deal finishing blows to enough enemies with your favorite subweapon, it will grow stronger and eventually hit its top level, called Mastery. This coincides with a steep increase in power, and usually a visual change to the subweapon. If you fully level up the Paper Plane, the planes become Koitsu from Parodius. Each subweapon has its own threshold to Mastery, and just as every enemy has its own experience stat that it grants on each kill, they also have unique subweapon mastery point values. I can tell you from experience that the weapon mastery system only works if you pay attention to it. Based on my prior experience with the Castlevania series, when I first played Portrait, I only really ever used subweapons on boss fights, so I never saw them get stronger. Portrait is an action game filled to the brim with numbers, more in-your-face statistics on every screen than any other of these games. This is the first game since Symphony of the Night to list total enemy kill count, but Portrait goes the extra mile and tells you how many of each individual enemy you've felled. The characters level up, there are so many armor and accessory items that change stats, and now the subweapons have their own level ups. Players often know if they're being manipulated to feel a certain way, just like the same that might happen to a movie watcher. And when making a movie or a game, you do your best to not rub your audience the wrong way. If a game is so oversaturated with numbers that go up, it risks being seen by some players as a popcorn game, a snack food game, or worse, uninteresting. This is really tragic in my opinion, because as an action game, Portrait of Ruin might just be the game with the second most mechanical depth, only behind Symphony of the Night. Here's yet another rearranged mechanic from Dawn, an NPC quest giver and quest reward giver. In Dawn, the weapon synthesis shop acted sort of as a quest dispenser, but all of the quests were simply to obtain the souls of particular enemies. Portrait's quests do include retrieving rare item drops from enemies, but also practicing fighting game motion inputs to unlock more, getting a negative status effect, and other incidental happenings, like going to the room with a big clock when your DS's system clock hits noon or midnight. The quests in Portrait are fine, mostly excuses to nudge players into backtracking to old areas and spending more time there. The rewards are often really useful, especially if you press A twice to accept the reward, and then press Start instead of any other button to quit the quest menu, which does not clear the quest reward as being received, meaning you can endlessly duplicate reward items. This is a great way to have enough money to buy every expensive item in the shop without having to grind at all. It feels very similar to soul item duplication in Demon's Souls or Dark Souls 1 to me. Brand new in Portrait is a co-op boss rush mode. 2 players can each pick a character and play the boss rush together. This idea would later be expanded into a whole game, Castlevania Harmony of Despair, for Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation 3. Harmony of Despair is equal parts tasteful, joyous celebration of this series and subpar budget game. A fine co-op concept, but miserable alone. At least its music is great. Anyway, that's Portrait of Ruin. Thanks for watching, and subscribe to see the next part about Order of Ecclesia.